Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Leidlinger, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Goliath Technologies. I'm excited to welcome everyone on our webinar today to learn how to troubleshoot poor session performance across your Citrix or VMware Horizon environment. I'm joined with our senior technical consultant, Yemi Ladyju, who in a few minutes is going to walk through real customer examples with demos on this very topic. Now, before we jump in, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items and set some expectations. I promise I'm only going to go over 3 short overview slides, giving you some backgrounds around the pains that we're going to talk about today, and I'm sure many of you are experiencing on the phone, as well as some context and background on Goliath. Then, as I mentioned, Yemi is going to jump into real troubleshooting scenarios that talk about how you solve slow session complaints that are coming from your end users. If you're in healthcare, how your EHR poor performance issues can be resolved and identified leveraging some of these tools we're going to discuss. And finally, how you can anticipate slow session performance and prevent it from occurring for your end users altogether. The webinar itself will run about 45 to 60 minutes. As our moderator said, please do put any of your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer those either throughout or at the end. You will get a copy of this recording in your inbox in the next 24 hours. And finally, as we create content for the community, we want to make sure we're hitting your expectations. So there is a short 3-question survey. Will take you almost less than 60 seconds to fill out. Please take the time to complete it. It's only based on your feedback we can ensure that we're delivering higher quality content over time. So with that, I'm going to get started. In today's IT landscape, delivering a seamless, high-performing, highly accessible end-user experience can be extremely challenging, especially across hybrid environments where you're delivering virtualized apps and desktops through Citrix or VMware Horizon. What makes that so challenging? Why has the complexity only increased over the last several years? Well, one, many of you realize this on the phone, but your environment is that hybrid nature today. Organizations are moving more and more workloads to the cloud. Some are even moving that virtualized environment to the cloud, but you still have a lot of mission critical applications and solutions that require that on-prem infrastructure. And so as you begin to migrate and move, that hybrid nature alone makes it really hard to isolate root cause when end user performance issues come across, and identifying is it something that's hosted external or internal into your own environment. The other piece of this is the demands of a new style of working is only increasing. Your users are working from any location, any device, any time of day, and they expect to consistently have that seamless end user experience. They don't want to hear that it could be something they're doing, or it could be something based on location or device that's impacting their experience. The expectation is they can work at any location at any place, and you as IT are responsible for supporting this new style of work. The other big challenge, and this is one that I think anyone outside of IT has a hard time appreciating, is often when you're running a Citrix or a VMware environment, your users are going to call in and say Citrix is slow, VMware Horizon is slow. But really, that is only a small piece of the entire delivery infrastructure. As you know, there's a lot of dependencies and other core IT elements. Maybe it's back-end systems like Active Directory, license servers, your SQL server, your print servers. There's the hypervisor host layer. You have proprietary custom protocols, network connectivity, and then end user behavior itself. So at any point in time, any of those elements can create slowness in your connection for the end user, but they don't realize that it's across a hybrid of different solutions, many from different applications or vendors, and also from their own actions and activities. This is what makes it so hard to isolate root cause, and why you really need purpose-built tools that can provide that end-to-end visibility, because those tools themselves are only looking at a small piece of the entire infrastructure you're supporting. And finally, if all of that wasn't complex enough for everybody, you're constantly having new initiatives. The world doesn't stop. You're moving new workloads to the cloud. You're engaging and starting new remote workforce programs, BYOD programs. You have performance enhancements. If you're in healthcare, you're consistently adding new clinical applications or upgrading within your EHR systems. So the amount of change that's going on is significant. and the only steady state you have is that change is always there. And it's because of these reasons and complexities that I'm confident that I can say here at Goliath, our main goal and passion is really help alleviate a lot of these professional pains that you're feeling around managing your hybrid IT infrastructure and your end user performance. And it's because of this passion that Goliath was founded, providing monitoring and troubleshooting software for that hybrid IT environment. We use embedded intelligence and automation to help IT professionals like yourselves proactively anticipate, troubleshoot, and prevent end user issues coming up, regardless of where workers are located or workloads are located. And really, most organizations simply don't have enough time, tools, or staff to troubleshoot every end user ticket that comes in or to proactively look for issues, because we know our users don't often even submit a ticket. And this is really where we come in. When organizations hire our product, I often say it's like they've hired 2 to 3 full-time troubleshooting experts that are now experts in their systems, experts across their user experience, and finding and isolating those root causes. The reason we can do this is because what you're going to see in the demo from Yemi is we have 3 core components making up our software. The first is our embedded intelligence and automation, which monitors over 300 key conditions, events, and failure points that will automatically alert you and your team before end users are impacted with a negative end user experience. And second, we know issues are going to happen, and so we offer these deep and broad metrics across that entire IT infrastructure I spoke about, across end user behavior elements, as well as within EHR applications for healthcare, such as Epic, Cerner, Meditech, and Allscripts. And those deep metrics allow you to troubleshoot and identify where issues are occurring and deliver permanent fixtures, as well as predict where they happen in the future. And I want to call out the EHR applications, because this is really critical for anyone on the phone in healthcare. Not only can we identify why Citrix is slow, but we can identify and pinpoint why an Epic is slow, Cerner is slow, Meditech, or Allscripts, and determine is the root cause something at the EHR layer, or is it potentially something that's going on in the IT delivery infrastructure, or again, clinicians itself. And finally, the other key element, and we're going to show this at the end of the webinar today, is we offer historical reports and analytics to help drive data-driven conversations across your team, with other vendors, other IT teams, management, and end users. I'm sure all of you have been in scenarios where there's slowness occurring and everyone starts pointing the fingers at what application and what team is responsible. We give you hard factual evidence so that you can identify exact root causes and go ahead and determine the right answer without the blame game. We also allow you then to look at trends so that you can see how has performance changed over time? How has moving workloads to the cloud impacted performance, if at all? And maybe most importantly, it really helps whenever your users call in and say, my system has been slow for weeks now. You can actually go back and look at that individual user session and determine, has it always been slow? Has it spiked in performance in certain times? And what was causing that spike? So instead of asking the end user to give you specifics, you have all of that data at your fingertips. And it's because of this purpose-built software that we're able to enable our customers around the globe, big and small, from different industries, to effectively isolate root cause of their end user complaints when it comes to things like slow session performance time, slow logons, or other performance issues, so that permanent fixes can be delivered, as well as future fixes based on anticipation of where issues may arise. Like I said earlier, our customers hire our software so they don't have to go hire experts in troubleshooting. Those experts typically don't exist. That's how they're using our automation and our intelligence that's built in. We have a stronghold in healthcare with our purpose-built EHR modules, as I mentioned. And maybe most importantly, as you look at these logos, recognize that our solution can scale both from a technology perspective to meet the needs of the largest clients as well as the smaller clients, but we can also scale economically. Our software tends to be a fraction of the investment that you've already made into your virtualized environment or your EHR application. And so economically, we scale based on the size of the organization. I often get that question, is it only applicable if we're large and have thousands of users? No, this is something can make an impact anywhere where your end users having a seamless experience is critical to drive business results. Our key is to make sure that it just works for your end users. Now, with that context, and I promise to be short, I'm going to turn it over to Yemi, who's now going to show you how the solution walks through specific troubleshooting scenarios so that you could handle questions around how do I find root cause for slow session performance. Yemi?
Thank you very much, Stacy. Thanks for setting the stage. And with that, we're going to jump right into the first troubleshooting scenario, which was a large home healthcare provider. They delivered their EHR system, which is Arrow, via on-prem Citrix virtual apps and desktops infrastructure on top of VMware hardware. And this particular healthcare provider, they have 30 different locations, and they're home healthcare providers, so they have to schedule appointments with patients all over the country. And they were having specific issues when it came to session performance and log-on times across the environment, which really impacted the ability to schedule these sort of appointments, really frustrating the IT department because they had no visibility into what was causing these issues. And most importantly, it was impacting or frustrating the clinicians and nurses that had to sort of reach out and go to those different home locations, and also the patients, because they would have to stay on the line on hold while the system was booting up or while these sort of processes were pulled up. So obviously this is very, very frustrating and affecting their bottom line. So it was this sort of pain that caused them to reach out to Goliath Technologies. And as soon as we deployed our technology, Stacy talked about sort of embedded intelligence and automation, we were able to discover a number of issues that was actually impacting their session performance. And before we show you how we did that, I just want to show the sort of issues that we were able to pick up. Number one was that they were having some issues with their legacy hypervisor host. So in this case, they had VMware hypervisor infrastructure, but they also had some legacy Citrix hypervisor infrastructure that they were still using in production, and they were able to point to, those poor sessions and poor logon times. They were focused really on those specific legacy hosts. They were also able to find some group policy issues impacting logon times, and we'll touch a little bit on that in the demonstration. They also found some high memory utilization issues on some of their machines. And I wanted to point this out because this is very typical in a Citrix environment. Stacy mentioned earlier that there are a number of different components that all contribute to Citrix in any environment. And because of that, there are multiple failure points and multiple root causes of issues similar to this example. So with that, let's go through and talk about how they were able to leverage the technology or this tool to be able to come up with these answers. So the first spot that they went to as soon as they deployed our technology was this page, which is the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Session Display. This is where all of those sessions across the environment pull up. Typically, they would be looking at those sessions that were for the people making or scheduling these applications or scheduling these appointments, excuse me. And before we sort of start diving in, I want to take a second to talk about how this is used by some of our customers. So obviously, when a user is calling in complaining about an issue, you get to the screen, you isolate the user, and then start to troubleshoot. But the technology is also looking for these sort of issues. So if a user has an out of normal logon time, or if they have, or they're experiencing sustained latency inside of their session, or an application failure, you would also be able to get an alert so that when that user calls in, the IT department almost they have that credibility to say, yes, we are aware of this. We got alerted to this a number of minutes ago, and we are working to come up with a resolution for you. But once you're on the screen, you can see that this is built to allow you to get to those sessions as quickly as possible. You can move tabs around if you would like, so there's an element of personalization here. You can filter or sort by any one of these particular tabs. So if there's a receiver version you don't really care for, or if you're looking for a particular server name or something like that, you can filter, and once you do that, it will automatically filter the screen. I wanted to point out here that you also have the ability to go back in time, and I think Stacy mentioned this when we were talking about the historical data. You're able to go back and see with the same amount of granularity a session from 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago. So you can retroactively go back and check and see what has changed in the environment that's causing an issue today that may not have been causing an issue last week or last month, depending on how long you want to keep the data for. So in this particular health systems case, what they did was they found all of those sessions that were experiencing issues inside of their environment. They pulled them up here, and then they were able to click on in any individual session, and what they get now is a pop-up of about 8 tabs showing all the information they need to troubleshoot issues in the environment, starting off with the summary tab. So what they started noticing is as they clicked on these individual sessions, they were seeing that there was the common denominator, and they were able to get that from this sort of linear dependency map here at the top of the screen. The common denominator was the specific Zen server host that they have in their environment. So to investigate further, they clicked here on host resources. It took them directly to the hypervisor host section of this user session. And what they were able to see was high CPU utilization, high memory utilization for all of those sessions that were being supported by those hosts. They also saw that there were some issues with the data stores specifically attached to those hosts. And here at the bottom of the screen, they saw that all of the VMs that were being supported by these hosts were experiencing the same issues. This was objective evidence that they were able to take over to management and say, hey, we need to decommission these hosts. We need to get these out of rotation because this is significantly impacting the user experience in the environment. So that was sort of the first thing that they were able to find. The next thing that they saw was during the users' logons, right? Specifically, those users that were experiencing issues, they were able to identify, well, first of all, they flipped over to the logon section here, and they were able to see, what's going on at Citrix, at the delivery controller, at Citrix receiver, where they didn't see any problems. But when they scrolled down to the bottom section that showed each stage of the process, they were able to identify a couple group policies that were sort of problematic and adding times to the process, because this really breaks down each policy that's affecting a user session down to the time that each one is taking. So they saw something similar to this where they had a browser sort of group policy that was adding time, as well as a decommissioned drive in their registry extension. And that drive obviously wasn't there, but user sessions were being mapped to that drive. It was adding about 2 minutes to the logon times for each user. So these were sort of simple fixes that they were able to do once they identified these issues. They removed them from rotation. They removed those policies, and that was able to cut down their logon times for about 90%. The final issue that they saw, they were able to identify from clicking on the App Server tab, where they saw for a number of machines there was high resource utilization. Just meant that those machines were under provisioned. They were able to sort of take this to the infrastructure team, and once those machines, once they added more memory to those machines, those issues were resolved. So you can see how in any individual user session, you're able to see all of the information that you need to troubleshoot, and that's exactly how this large health system was able to leverage the tool to come up with answers. So the next scenario we're going to talk about is with universal health services. And this is another sort of complex environment. Universal Health Services, just quick background, they have about 29 different acute care facilities across the United States, and a number of different clinics around the United States as well. They have some infrastructure at those different locations, so where they typically just they deliver a desktop so people can access their Cerner application, which is a completely hosted application. It's an EHR EMR application. It's completely hosted out of Kansas City, and it's delivered by Citrix. So the challenge Universal Health Services was having is that in a number of different hospital locations within the Nevada area, people were complaining about poor session performance, really, really poor session performance, where they couldn't use dictation, they couldn't do anything inside of their session, or even get kicked off of the sessions. Now, obviously, in a scenario where you're using a completely hosted environment or a completely hosted application, people have this perception that, okay, if there's problems taking place, then it has to be the application itself. So obviously, tickets were opened up with Cerner, and everyone starts to blame Cerner. Cerner's like, well, it's not our issue. Cerner's blaming the local IT department. So there's a lot of finger pointing going on when these sort of issues start to take place. Now, what they did was, because the UHS has our technology, and we're the only technology that's actually deployed in Cerner's remote hosted facility, they were able to identify the root cause of these issues within a couple of minutes, within an hour. And how they did that was, well, obviously Cerner is going to go through their own internal tools, and they didn't find any issues. The network team at those different facilities, they also went through their different tools and didn't find any issues. But when UHS looked inside of Goliath, what they were able to identify was actual latency between the XenApp servers in Cerner RHO and the users that were logging in from those different hospitals. Those hospitals had a sort of interconnected network, so they were all sort of on the same network logging into Cerner, and they were able to identify those latency issues. This was information that UHS then took to the network team at that particular facility, and it turns out that they had a specific network device that wasn't configured correctly. And as soon as they, took that network device out of rotation, the latency went back to normal, and they were able to confirm with Goliath that those issues were solved. So with that, let's talk through exactly how they were able to do this. So we're going to jump back into the product here, and similar to what we went through in the first scenario, in this case they isolated those sessions from that specific location that were having an issue. They clicked on the session, and again they get a pop-up of 8 tabs showing them all the information they need to troubleshoot. And they were actually able to come up with those answers just by looking here on this summary screen. So first things first, they looked at the key performance metrics section, because this is really built to allow you to come up with answers as to what's causing slowness inside of a user session. So first thing they looked at was round trip time. And for those sessions, they were able to identify and confirm that these users were having poor sessions because of the high round trip times. I think round trip times over about 350 milliseconds is actually going to be apparent to the user as being poor inside of their session. So once they were able to confirm that with round trip time, they needed to know whether those high round trip times were being caused by network issues or resource issues from Cerner. How they're able to do that is by clicking here on network latency. This is real-time network latency, not the typical ICMP or ping-based network latency. This is a metric that's going to show you specifically how the network is impacting this particular session. So from there, they were able to identify, yes, network latency is also really high. So it's not a resource issue. It's probably not something on Cerner's side. We should be looking closer at that particular location. Now, the final piece of the puzzle was connection speed. This is the amount of bandwidth available for Citrix receiver at the user's endpoints. So wherever this user is connecting in from, in their case, it was from the specific hospital locations in Nevada, but this could be, a user logging in from their home office, from a Starbucks or something like that. This shows you how much bandwidth or what is the connection speed wherever they're connecting in from, and how much of that is allocated for Citrix. So when they looked at those affected sessions, they saw an average of 0.5 megabits per second connection speed from those different from those hospital locations connecting in from Nevada, which, as we all know, is not enough to have a responsive session. So this was the exact information that they took over to the network team at those locations, and they were able to then use this to search for those issues and find them. So that's exactly how UHS was able to leverage this in this particular case to be able to come up with that root cause and solve the issue very quickly, because as soon as that network device was taken out of rotation, they were able to see a spike or a jump back up in connection speed, which then lowered the latency and the round trip time, and that's how they confirmed that those issues were solved. The last scenario we're going to talk about is one with Drake University. Over 3,000 of their students, they have over 3,000 students, and they deliver, Citrix virtual apps and desktops to the users. They also have Zen server or Citrix hypervisor infrastructure, as well as VMware, and that's a sort of similar or very popular configuration that a lot of our customers have. And in their case, they're having issues specifically with users accessing a couple of applications, specifically Excel, and specifically it was users. They thought it was users that were accessing Excel, accessing Citrix via their Mac OS devices. Again, in a bring your own device type environment. So they deployed our technology, and they were able to identify that it wasn't specifically a Mac issue. It was some memory utilization issues, and they were able to go through the same exact process that we just went through in those two scenarios. But the other sort of pain point for Drake University was that there was no way to anticipate sort of these issues when it comes to availability and users being able to access their critical applications. So they wanted a technology that they could deploy that was going to tell them exactly when these issues were going to take place, so that they could get ahead of those issues and fix them before it impacted their end users. And that's what they got with Goliath. So where we're going to flip over is to the technology that they actually deployed, which is what we call our application availability monitor. And this sort of technology is deployed on a virtual machine or a laptop or workstation at sort of each of the different locations that users are going to be logging in from. The idea is to get this sort of technology as close as possible to where the users are going to be logging in from. And this technology, what it does is it goes through and it tests the entire delivery infrastructure by logging on a 24/7, 365 basis, right? So it's logging on typically before users start to log in, or before heavy workload hours, so that they can be alerted to issues that are going to impact the users, or in their case, the students' ability to log in and access these resources. So this page is the central sort of management and monitoring console for this portion of the technology. And it's broken down into two sections. The top section here shows, or gave them the ability to see at any point in time a live dashboard of availability. So the trend line here is overall availability, and the blue bars are actually average launch times for all of those different sort of synthetic transactions taking place from all of their different locations. And you can see here at the top, you can filter based on date range, based on locations that you're launching these applications and desktops from, and also what applications and desktops that you're launching. Now, the bottom section is typically where they would go if they had gotten an alert saying that there's a particular failure, there's a launch failure, an application failure inside of the environment. So here at the bottom of the screen, from left to right, you can see the date and time of the launch. You can see what application or desktop was being launched. You can see where it was being launched from. And ultimately, you can see whether that launch was successful or if it failed. And if it did fail, you can actually see at what stage it failed. This Drake University really, there's a lot of different places or a lot of different infrastructure pieces that impact availability, and depending on what stage it failed, it gives you an ability to troubleshoot or to narrow down the troubleshooting path. So in this case, you can see exactly what stage it failed, but you can take it a little bit further by clicking on this magnifying glass icon, and now every stage of the process is then represented here with screenshots. So you can see all the way up until what error message would have potentially been potentially presented to those users, so that you can get ahead of that. You get an early warning system, as Drake University did here, as well as they are able to see the error message that would have presented, so that they can get ahead of those issues and solve them as quickly as possible before they impact the users. So with that, we're going to jump back into the slideshow here, and we're going to talk a little bit about leveraging the historical reports and analytics, because in every one of these scenarios, obviously the detailed metrics are important to be able to troubleshoot, but you also need to be able to understand what's happening in your environment, and how you could prevent these issues from happening again in the future. So right here we have a couple of reports that we deploy into your environment as soon as you deploy our technology, and we'll talk a little bit about how some of our customers use this. These are some of the most popular ones, of course. So the first one here is a license usage report. This one's used very heavily by, I think, most of our customers, because they like the ability to understand how licensing is being impacted in their environment as they add users, as they add applications. They want to be able to track and trend license usage based on hour, based on delivery groups, and this sort of enables them to do so. The next one is more about performance, and I think the next one after this would be performance, but this one specifically breaks open log on time. So this was heavily used by that home healthcare provider, because this was able to show over time, based on the different stages of the logon process, how that was impacting users. So their brokering and client validation, group policy times, and as they make changes to the environment, this shows how those changes are affecting each stage of the process, as well as the users in a whole. And this next one is more of a sort of a graphical representation of that, where you see the different stages of the logon process here at the top section. And then you can see session counts per hour, per day, and log on times during those times as well. So again, you can get an understanding or a baseline of your environment as a whole, and as you make changes, you can see how those changes impact your users. So with that, I'll pass it back to Stacy to wrap us up.
Great, thanks, Yemi. And we do have a few questions that have come in. If you have additional questions, please submit those and we will answer them here in a minute. Everything you just saw from Yemi demoing these customer scenarios hopefully helps really articulate and identify how Goliath can help you proactively anticipate, troubleshoot, and prevent end-user performance issues across your hybrid environment, regardless of where users are located or those workloads. What you saw Yemi show, especially in this last example, is how we're using embedded intelligence to proactively alert you of end-user issues before they occur. So when I talked earlier about our customers hiring us as if they've hired full-time experts to just focus on troubleshooting, this is where that intelligence that we've built in over years of working with customers really comes into play, so that we can help alert so you don't have to go look for those issues. The second thing you saw was even just a sample of some of the broad and deep metrics that we can deliver across that complex IT infrastructure, end user behavior, as well as EHR modules. One of the reasons we went into the example with UHS is so that you could see the breadth that we can provide in the healthcare space. And then finally, you just saw a sample of the historical reports that we deliver to drive those data-driven conversations so you can end the blame game and have factual evidence to have discussions about improving end-user performance and experience with your management teams, other vendors, your colleagues as in other IT teams, and end users themselves. So with that, Yemi, let's jump into the questions. We've got several here that was around log-on time. So one of the questions around log-on time was, could you go ahead and give an answer around what is a good log-on time? And then we also had a couple anecdotes around some of the log-ons they saw were extremely long in the environment that we were showing. And I think we can talk about that being a little for demo purposes. But can you respond to what constitutes a good log-on time?
Yeah, every environment's different, depending on security, depending on what the users need inside of their sessions. Log-on times can vary, but I know, a lot of our customers, and, we actually have some reporting tools that allow this. A lot of our customers set goals of, I think about within, definitely under 30 seconds, but, within the 12 to 15 second range is what a lot of our customers' goals are when it comes to log-on times. And yeah, the lab environment here is, sort of set up to show some of the details that we get. So yeah, the lab environment is going to have some log-on times that are pretty high, but yeah, most people are looking for log-on times within trying to get it down from about 12 to 15 seconds. At least that's what we hear.
Perfect. Next question is, we have someone that's going through a Citrix upgrade, and they want to know, can you help them monitor both the old and new versions so that they can compare performance time?
Absolutely, and to your point, and to that point, that's exactly how a number of our customers are leveraging the technology. Obviously, when we're talking about baselining, and we're talking about the changes that happen within a Citrix environment, you need to be able to understand and you're supposed to and really get an understanding of the performance of your environment as you're building it, as well as some of the things that you had set up in your last environment so that you can make sure that there's some continuity. So a lot of our customers, especially when deploying new technologies, they leverage our technology, bring us in to be able to baseline and to really just monitor both environments.
Perfect. Here's another one. Just a few weeks ago, we spent several hours, maybe even a day, trying to discover why some users were having slow performance times, and it seems like it was a subgroup seeing the issue, and we didn't know why. It ended up we had a bad Citrix receiver. Is this something you could diagnose quickly?
Absolutely, and I think we can probably jump into the technology itself to really go through that. So bear with me. I'm going to flip back into the technology and talk about a little bit how customers are able to use the technology to identify that. So first things first, again, inside of any user session, you can click on a session, and typically you'll be able to see what receiver version they have. But if you flip over to the logon section, there's a dedicated section here for how much Citrix receiver is actually impacting this particular user session. So overall session startup time or session creation time at the startup client, you can see here this is about 23 seconds added to the logon process. So you can tell immediately that that's some sort of issue that we need to be taking a look at. And because here at the top of the screen you can see what exact Citrix receiver version this user has, so you can sort of start to make those correlations and isolate Citrix receiver as being the root cause of issues. You can also, on the session display, you can also come over here and sort by receiver version, and as you can see, for a lot of those sessions that have long logons, most of them have older receiver versions, which is something that can impact user performance, absolutely.
Perfect. Next question is, we have a large remote workforce. Can you identify if a performance issue is because of our system or something going on at the endpoint with a remote worker?
Absolutely, and that's exactly, the scenario that Universal Health Services was, UHS, they were in, because you had at a particular location poor connectivity. So we were able to identify that, but with the connection speed metric and the network latency. So we have a ton of customers. If you take, for instance, Penn National Insurance, that have a remote workforce initiative, and they were able to identify certain bottlenecks in the network performance due to people having poor connectivity at their endpoints. They had some satellite users that they were able to identify, and really just, again, having the metrics like that enable you to have data-driven conversations with the users or whatever network team, just to make sure that you're providing them with the best service.
Great. We have a question on reporting. How far back can they see data from the system?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually give you the ability to decide how long you want to keep data for. So whether that's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, we've had customers in healthcare that store data for over a year. So you can go back and leverage either the historical reporting or the dashboard views in our technology to go back and get any information, really depending on how long you like to keep the data for.
Great. And last question, unless anyone else wants to submit one here, is how are your agents deployed? Do you have to put one on each endpoint?
That's a good question. For any of the information that we saw in the demonstration today, we do not actually have to deploy any agents to the user's endpoints. We have a lightweight intelligent agent that is deployed in the Citrix infrastructure, as well as on the machines that are hosting sessions in the environment. We also collect data via APIs and other agentless communication methods, but we actually don't have to deploy any technology to the endpoints to get the information that you see here on the screen. We also do have endpoint monitoring, and a lot of our customers do leverage that to get some additional insight into the performance of the machines that users are using to access Citrix or VMware Horizon. But for all of the user experience issues or experience metrics and connection speed and latency and things like that, we actually don't have to put any technology on the endpoint.
And perfect, Yemi. And you're not off the hot seat yet. We had one last question come in, and others feel free to bring more. But what's a good number for ICA session latency?
That's a good question. So for ICA latency, right? ICA latency is sort of it's looked at as a sort of one way. So from the client all the way to the resource itself. So for ICA latency, I think that's about Citrix recommends that it should be under 250 milliseconds. But for round trip time, if round trip time is above 350 milliseconds, because obviously round trip time is back and forth, then that would be sort of apparent to the user. The ICA protocol does a really good job of sort of masking latency, but anything over 250 milliseconds with ICA latency, that would be sort of apparent to the user.
Perfect. And we actually have a guide around ICA latency, if anyone's interested, on our website, and we can make sure that we send it out to the individual that asked the question as well, if it's something that you want to learn more about beyond what we shared today. So with that, again, Yemi, thank you very much for your demonstrations today. And I do ask everyone that is on the line, as soon as you close out of GoToWebinar, you will get a 3-question short survey. Please respond so that we can ensure that we are delivering the best content that will meet your needs in future sessions. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.